Infamous prisoners often get public attention through trial, sentencing, and execution. This makes many curious about what their last meals would be and their final words. Some made peace, others spat defiance, and a few left behind cryptic messages that still haunt history. What did these infamous prisoners eat before their last breath? And what chilling words did they leave behind? Let's dive into their final moments. Jimmy Glass, State, Louisiana. Date of execution, June 12, 1987. Jimmy Glass was a high school dropout with a criminal record. He escaped from a parish jail in Minden in December 1982 with a fellow inmate, Jimmy C. Wingo. While making calls to their families, they were left unattended. Glass and Wingo took advantage of the opportunity for their escape. They went down the elevator and successfully exited the building. However, less than 24 hours after their escape, Glass and Wingo broke into the house of Newton Brown. While burglarizing their home, they shot Newton and his wife on Christmas Eve. The Browns woke up on Christmas Day to find their parents dead. Glass was arrested first, and Wingo was found later. They were both convicted and sentenced to death in the electric chair. Glass was put to death on June 12, 1987, at the age of 25, becoming the 78th individual executed in the United States since 1977. For his final meal, he requested a pepperoni pizza, a chef's salad with blue cheese dressing, fresh peaches and cream, and 2 soft drinks. He smiled as he was secured in the electric chair, and when offered the chance for a final statement, he responded with, "Yeah, I think I'd rather be fishing." He was declared dead at 12:14 a.m. Jeffrey David Matthews, State, Oklahoma. Date of execution, January 11, 2011. Jeffrey David Matthews was convicted of the murder of Edith Short on January 27, 1994. Together with Tracy Dyer, they went to the house of Edith and Minnie Short in the early hours. Minnie heard noise from the living room and rose to check the source of the noise. She was stabbed in the back as she stepped into the living room. She tried to struggle with the attacker, but was slit in the throat. As her husband Earl entered the living room, he was shot in the back of the head. Matthews and Dyer demanded the location of the money from Minnie and spent about 2 hours ransacking the house for it. They finally gave up and left with $500, a .32 caliber pistol, and the Shorts' brown pickup. Minnie Short survived the attack, but her husband, Edith Short, died. Dyer's call from the kitchen was instrumental in tracing them to the crime. When Dyer was brought in for questioning, he confessed his involvement in searching for the money, but named Matthews as the killer. On January 28, 1994, Matthews was arrested and his trial began. He was convicted and found guilty of first-degree murder, assault and battery with a deadly weapon, and conspiracy to commit a felony. He was also charged with unauthorized use of a motor vehicle. The murder weapon was found in a field behind Matthews' house. Despite various appeals, he was sentenced to death and scheduled for execution. His execution was postponed twice by the governor of Oklahoma to investigate his claims of innocence further. Then it was postponed once because of the controversy surrounding the drugs they were going to administer to him. Finally, his execution day came. For his last meal, he ate a deep dish meat lover's pizza, deep-fried jumbo shrimp, and 2 hush puppies with vinegar sauce. As he was strapped to a gurney with a needle in his arm, he addressed his family members who witnessed his execution. About 76 other death row inmates banged the steel doors of their cells to pay tribute to Matthews. "Let my mother know I love her," he said, looking through the window that separated the death chamber from where the family members were. "I love you too," a woman replied, and he continued, "I just want to thank everyone for their support. I also want to thank all my buddies on death row. I hear you banging." He mentioned that he had left notes for his family and the family of the victim, but didn't directly address them, even though about 10 of them were present for his execution. Still speaking to his relatives, he said, "I hate to see you all in this situation." I'm sitting here enjoying my last moments. Enjoy your lives." Then, before the lethal substances began to flow, he said while smiling, "I think the governor's phone is broken. He hadn't called yet." This was probably because the governor had given stays twice for prosecutors to properly investigate his claims of innocence, and he expected to have that again. However, those were his last words before he was pronounced dead at 6:09 p.m. Barbara Graham, State, California. Date of execution, June 3, 1955. Barbara Elaine Wood Graham, with Jack Santo and Emmett Perkins, was convicted of the robbery and murder of Mabel Monahan. Graham had a rough childhood. She was born to a teenage mother who was into prostitution. When she was 2, her mother was arrested and taken to reform school. Graham and her siblings were placed in foster care, where she alleged to have been treated badly and beaten. When her mother was released at 21, she refused for Graham to live with her. She was raised by strangers and extended family. When she was a teenager, she was arrested for vagrancy and sent to the same reform school her mother went to. After her release, she married, had 2 children, and divorced. Her ex-husband had custody of her children. She went back to the streets and earned a living through prostitution. She became involved in gambling and illegal substance circles and was arrested many times. She served a 5-year term in prison. When she was released, she moved to a new city and got a job at a hospital as a waitress, but she didn't stay there long. She moved away to another city where she returned to prostitution. She met and married her husband, Henry Graham, who was friends with Jack Santo and Emmett Perkins. She had a 3rd child with Henry, who was addicted to illegal substances. She started an affair with Perkins, and he was the one who told her about Mabel Monahan. She was a widow rumored to have a lot of cash in her house. Her daughter had divorced her wealthy husband, who was still friends with Monahan. The rumor was that he left a huge cash in her care due to this trust. Graham, together with Perkins, Santo, True, and Shorter, planned to rob her. On the day of the attack, Graham knocked on Monahan's door, requested to use her phone, and claimed that she had issues with her car and needed help. While the old widow opened her door, the others came from behind. They gagged her and searched her home for the money. However, their search was futile, and they had to leave the house. They were arrested later, and the trial began. During the trial, Graham maintained her stance that she was innocent. However, her attempt to get a false alibi was discovered, and her credibility before the court was damaged. She was sentenced to death in the gas chamber, and all her appeals were rejected. She was scheduled to be executed at 10 a.m. on June 3, 1955, but the California governor stayed it until 10:45 a.m. By 10:43, the execution was stayed again until 11:30 a.m. It was at this time that Graham protested. She said, "Why do they torture me? I was ready to go at 10 o'clock." She was strapped in the gas chamber by 11:28 a.m. She requested a blindfold to avoid looking at the observers who were present. For her final word, she said, "Good people are always so sure they're right." Then, when she was advised to take a deep breath after the cyanide pellets were dropped to make her death easier, she replied, "How the hell would you know?" For her last meal, she had steak and a salad. She was buried in Mount Olivet Cemetery, San Rafael, California. James Lewis Jackson, State, Texas. Date of execution, February 7, 2007. James Lewis Jackson was arrested for the murder of his wife, Sharon Jackson, and 2 stepdaughters, Erica Mays and Sansaria Mays. In April 1997, Jackson, a crack addict, struggled to maintain his marriage. When it became obvious that his wife wanted to divorce him, he couldn't take it. While he confessed to his crimes, he claimed that he did it because he didn't want her to leave him. On April 8, 1997, the day of the crime, his 2 stepdaughters returned from school, and he asked them if they supported their mother's intention to divorce him. The youngest got home first and said she had mixed feelings about the divorce. He strangled her to death and waited for the arrival of the other one. When she arrived, she also didn't seem to be against the divorce, and he strangled her too. Finally, he went to pick up his wife from work and strangled her too. He tucked all their bodies into their beds. He was arrested and convicted of the crime. During the investigation, the police found a note in their apartment. "I could not take care of my family. I didn't have a job. I gave them back to God. He and they will understand." However, Jackson claimed the note was a prayer and not a death note, and started claiming innocence. His lawyer tried to argue that he confessed to the crime under duress, but that didn't hold water. He was sentenced to death by lethal injection. In an interview while on death row, he insisted that he was innocent, but would accept the death sentence so he could reunite with his family. The Supreme Court of the United States denied his appeal to stay his execution. He was scheduled for execution on February 7, 2007. For his final meal, he requested 4 pieces of fried chicken, fried okra, French fries, salad with blue cheese, 4 hard-boiled eggs with cheese, 2 Cokes, butter pecan ice cream, and 2 honey buns. When it was about time for his execution, he was led from his cell to the death chamber. Before making his final declaration, he turned to his sister, brother, and friends who were present to address them. He said, "This is not the end, but the beginning of a new chapter. I love you all. See you on the other side." Then he said, "Warden, murder me. I'm ready to roll. Time to get this party started." He laughed at a gesture one of the guests made as the lethal chemicals entered his body. He gurgled and died shortly after. He was pronounced dead at 6:18 p.m. Robert Charles Towery, State, Arizona. Date of execution, March 8, 2012. Robert Charles Towery was convicted of the robbery and murder of philanthropist Robert Jones. Towery met Jones through his automotive business, and they were acquainted. Jones trusted Towery so much that he even lent him money. However, Towery did what Jones least expected. Randy Barker, Towery's accomplice in the crime who later became a witness against him, told the police that Jones was cool the entire time of the operation. He was oblivious to the fact that the men had approached him with the intent to rob him and probably realized what was happening too late. On the day of the attack, Towery and his accomplice entered the house of Robert Jones. He pulled a weapon on him while Barker handcuffed him. Towery loaded money, jewelry, electronics, and other valuables into Jones' car. He then laid Jones face down on the bed and injected him with battery acid. He told Jones that the substance would put him to sleep. After he believed Jones was asleep, he strangled him to death. Jones's body was discovered the next day, and after about a week, his car was found. Towery and Barker were arrested after someone found Robert Jones' possession with Towery and tipped the authorities. In November 1992, he was sentenced to death. His lawyers tried to appeal for a reduced sentence, especially because his accomplice, Barker, only got 10 years for his involvement in the crime. However, his appeals were denied, and he remained on death row. He was on death row for about 2 decades before his execution. On the day of his execution, he apologized to the victim's family and cursed his bad mistakes. He then said, "I love my family." Potato, potato, potato. The potato reference was a secret message to his nephew. It is a sound that a Harley-Davidson motorcycle makes while the engine is idle and a way of saying that everything is okay. For his last meal, he had porterhouse steak with sautéed mushrooms, baked potato with butter and sour cream, steamed asparagus, a cup of clam chowder, a soft drink, apple pie with vanilla ice cream, and some milk. Gary Simmons, State, Mississippi. Date of execution, June 20, 2012. Gary Carl Simmons Jr. was a butcher at a grocery store who was found guilty of sexual assault, robbery, substance, and dismemberment committed in 1996. At the time, Simmons was residing in Mississippi when a substance dealer named Jeffrey Wolf drove from Houston to confront him. Wolf and his girlfriend had come to collect a $20,000 debt that Simmons and another man, Timothy Milano, had been delinquent in paying. Unfortunately, Simmons and Milano didn't have the cash. They lacked any substances to offer as an alternative payment as well. When a dispute escalated, Milano shot Wolf fatally with a rifle. Following that, Simmons hogtied Wolf's girlfriend and locked her in a closet. The two men later took her out to sexually assault her. After they finished assaulting her, Simmons and Milano returned to dismember Wolf's body using knives from Simmons's job at the grocery store. They disposed of the remains in a bayou behind the house where the murder took place. The girlfriend managed to escape when they were preoccupied with this task. She ran to a neighbor's house and alerted the police. Upon their arrival, officers arrested Milano and Simmons. Milano received a life sentence in prison, while Simmons was sentenced to death by lethal injection on August 29, 1997. On June 20, 2012, the execution day, he was led to the death chamber from his cell. His final words were, "I've been blessed to be loved by some good people, by some amazing people. I thank them for their support. Now, let's get it on so these people can go home. That's it." For his last meal, he requested one Pizza Hut, medium super supreme deep dish pizza, double portion, with mushrooms, onions, jalapeno peppers, and pepperoni. Pizza, regular portion, with 3 cheeses, olives, bell pepper, tomato, garlic, and Italian sausage. Packs of Parmesan cheese, packs of ranch dressing, 1 family-size bag of Doritos nacho cheese flavor, jalapeno nacho cheese, sliced jalapenos, 2 large strawberry shakes, 2 cherry cokes, 1 super-size order of McDonald's fries with extra ketchup and mayonnaise, and 2 pints of strawberry ice cream. As expected, he wasn't able to finish it before being escorted away for his execution. Robert Alton Harris. State, California. Date of execution, April 21, 1992. Robert Alton Harris was known for several crimes. He met his fate on death row following a crime wave that swept through San Diego during the summer of 1978. Initially, he and his brother Daniel stole a vehicle. They then went to a fast food restaurant and abducted 2 teenage boys. They forced the boys to drive them to a deserted place. When the boys objected to how they were being treated, Harris callously shot both of them. He told them to stop crying and die like men before pulling the trigger. They then used the stolen vehicle to rob a bank. The police arrested them later at their home. One of the officers who arrested Harris and his brother was the father of one of the slain boys. The officer did not know this connection until after making the arrest. By the time he was detained, indicted, and found guilty, the people of San Diego had grown weary of Harris's violent actions. A judge swiftly sentenced him to death following his notorious trial. After numerous appeals and legal conflicts, Robert Alton Harris faced the penalty for his actions. His brother was sentenced to 6 years in prison. On April 21, 1992, he was taken to the execution chamber at San Quentin State Prison. His final words were, "You can be a king or a street sweeper, but everyone dances with the Grim Reaper." For his last meal, he requested a 21-piece bucket of KFC chicken, 2 large pizzas from Domino's, a bowl of ice cream, a bag of jelly beans, a 6-pack of soda, and a final pack of Camel cigarettes. It remains uncertain whether he realized that prison officials made one small alteration on that significant day. They cooked him 2 Tombstone pizzas instead of the requested Domino's fare. John Wayne Gacy. State, Illinois. Date of execution, May 10, 1994. John Wayne Gacy was a convicted serial killer. In the early 1970s, he was a married father of 2 young children. During his free time, he volunteered as a clown at local hospitals, aiming to lift the spirits of sick children. He was well known in the community for dressing up in clown attire and makeup to contribute to charitable events. Professionally, he managed several KFC restaurants in the Chicago area. He seemed like an ordinary person with a typical family life and community involvement to everyone around him. However, hidden beneath that facade was a deep secret. Between 1972 and 1978, Gacy murdered at least 33 teenage boys and young men before he was captured. He buried the remains of more than 12 victims beneath his house in the Chicago suburbs. When his acts were discovered, he was charged with numerous counts of murder and imprisoned. Following a shocking criminal trial, Gacy was sentenced to death. On May 10, 1994, the day of his execution, his final words were, "Kiss my ass." For his last meal, Gacy requested a bucket of KFC's original recipe, a bowl of French fries, a dozen fried shrimp, and a pound of strawberries. After satisfying his appetite, he was executed by lethal injection. Gary Gilmore, State, Texas. Date of execution, January 17, 1977. In the summer of 1976, Gary Mark Gilmore stole from two men in rural Utah. To eliminate any possible witnesses, he murdered both men and disposed of their bodies. However, his attempt to avoid leaving any witnesses was thwarted when he accidentally shot himself with the gun used in the crime. Although he was not seriously injured, he left behind a trail of blood evidence. Police followed the blood trail and identified him as the murderer. He was apprehended, charged, and found guilty of the killings. During his sentencing, a judge in Utah ruled that he was eligible for the death penalty. While on death row, he began insisting that he wanted to be executed. Unlike most inmates who typically fight against their sentences, Gilmore chose to waive his appeals and accept death. This led lawyers and judges to reconsider the appeals process for death row inmates due to his exceptional demands. His tale was so impactful that it inspired author Norman Mailer's The Executioner's Song. That book ultimately earned the Pulitzer Prize. As for Gilmore, his execution was imminent. On January 17, 1977, he faced a firing squad at Utah State Prison. His final meal was a hamburger, a baked potato, a hard-boiled egg, and coffee. It's rumored that he also consumed 3 shots of Jack Daniel's whiskey that had been smuggled into the prison. When asked for his final words, he said, "Let's do it." Velma Barfield, State, North Carolina. Date of execution, November 2, 1984. Velma Barfield was a mother and grandmother who had been discovered to have killed individuals using arsenic and various other poisoning methods throughout her life. She was initially arrested for one murder, but confessed to killing other people. She presented herself as a devout Christian, much like many older women in the region during that era. However, she concealed a grim secret that eventually came to light. Velma was responsible for the murder of 5 people through arsenic poisoning, including her own mother. Additionally, she was suspected of having caused the premature deaths of 2 of her former husbands, who died under suspicious circumstances. Although she was not charged in those 2 cases, the arsenic murders were linked to her in court. After her conviction for the murders, Velma was placed on death row at the women's section of the state's central prison in Raleigh. While awaiting her execution, she occupied her time by praying and knitting items for her grandchildren. Then, on November 2, 1984, her life came to an end. That morning, she made history by becoming the first woman to be executed by lethal injection. Hours before her execution on the night of November 1st, she enjoyed her last meal. Instead of a large feast, Velma chose to indulge in a few snacks. She selected cheese doodles, a Kit Kat candy bar, and a bottle of Coca-Cola for her final meal. Her final words were, "I know that everybody has gone through a lot of pain, all the families connected, and I am sorry, and I want to thank everybody who has been supporting me all these 6 years." She was buried in a small, rural North Carolina cemetery near her first husband, Thomas Burke. If you like the way we create these videos and you want us to bring more cases like this to light, please hit the like button and subscribe for more deep dives.